So as I said, I want to take a couple minutes to go through this practice with 2.4 and talking about these shifts of supply and demand and new equilibrium. Now this practice has technically 4 different problems, each with 2 parts in it. I'm only going to go through the front side. I'm going to make the back side available, the answer key available to you on Canvas as well. So I'd encourage you to check that out. But I at least want to walk through the intuition behind how to do these. So first and foremost, like any good economist, we want to label our graph. And so I've already gone ahead and labeled my graph as we saw how to do in 2.3 with P1, Q1, E1, D1, S1, all that kind of stuff. Now what we want to do then is explore what's going on in this problem. So if you notice, it says we want to draw and label a graph for the corn market. There's a severe drought one summer. So what we want to do is we want to focus in on this idea that there is a severe drought one summer, and we want to understand what is that going to do to either our supply or our demand curve. Well, as we had talked before, weather is typically something we refer to as a supply shock. And so what that's going to do is it's going to shift our supply curve, and it's actually going to be a negative or a decrease of our supply curve. So it's going to shift it back to the left here, and we're going to label that one as S2. Now what we want to see then is we have our new equilibrium right here. And at our new equilibrium, we want to understand what has happened to our price and what has happened to our quantity. Well, if you notice, our price went up from P1 up to our new equilibrium at P2. And so what we would say is the market price for corn in that case, or the price at our new equilibrium, it has increased, right? Now, what has happened to our quantity from Q1 to Q2, from our original equilibrium to our new equilibrium here at E2? Well, if you notice, we went from Q1 to Q2, we moved closer toward the origin, and so what that means is the quantity is decreasing, and so we would write decreased. If you want to draw like up arrows and down arrows, I'm also fine with that, but we need to indicate what is specifically happening to that price and the quantity or output. It's the same thing, right? So we want to first, again, like we did, is identify what event is going on in this market and then what happens from there, what kind of shifts occur. So if we look at B, it says use and label a new graph, and so we've already labeled it, to show what happens in the corn market if there is a decrease in the price of corn pesticide, which is an input in production. At the same time, we see that the price of butter decreases. All right, so let's break these down because we actually have 2 different things occurring at once. The first thing we have a decrease in the price of a pesticide, which is an input. And then we also have the price of butter decreasing. And so we need to kind of break these things down one by one. So there's a decrease in the price of an input. Well, like we talked about before with like the salsa example, if I buy tomatoes for salsa, if the price of tomatoes goes down, I can buy more tomatoes. Same thing here. If the price of that pesticide goes down, that means that we are able to get more of it, or we can spend less money on it and put more money into our company. But regardless, the way that's going to look is that's going to result in an increase in our supply. So a shift to the right of our supply. And so we're going to have that as S2 right there. And that's that first one. So we've gotten that first one out of the way. And then we say the price of butter decreases. Now, I don't know about you, but in order to eat my corn, I feel like I have to have butter because butter, we would say, is a complement to corn, right? So if the price of butter goes down, we're going to buy more butter. And if we buy more butter, we have to have something to put our butter on. And so we're going to probably buy more corn. And so what we would see then, if we're going to buy more corn, there's going to be an increase in demand for corn. So we're going to have that one right there, and that's going to be D2. And so what we've seen is we've had an increase in our demand, we've had an increase in our supply, and after this double shift, we're at a new equilibrium right here. We're going to call that one E2. Now, what has happened to our equilibrium? What has happened to the equilibrium price of corn, the market price of corn? Well, again, even though it looks like it stays the same, we cannot say that because we don't know if it stayed the same or not. Like we don't know how positive was the positive positive shift in price with an increase in demand. We don't know how negative the shift in price was when we saw an increase in supply. So since we don't know the size of these positives or negatives, we have to say, hey, that one right there is unknown, right? It's unknown. But then what has happened to the output for corn? Well, we can see and say beyond a shadow of a doubt that the quantity has increased because we had a positive change in quantity as that demand increased. We had a positive change in quantity as that supply increased, and a positive plus a positive is a positive. It's an increase. So that is exactly how you would set up one of these problems. And if you guys notice here, all the labels are done properly, writing out unknown or increase or whatever occurs there. That's how you would set one of those up. So let's look at the second one on the front side. Let's say that we are going to draw and label the graph for the soda market. And there's a tax placed on the sellers of sugary drinks. And so again, we want to focus on this event that occurs. There's a tax that is placed on the sellers of the sugary drinks. Now, there's a couple keywords here, things that we're going to grab here. We know it's a tax, and we also know it's on the sellers. And so we know this is going to be a supply side thing. And so whenever that tax is placed on the sellers, is that going to allow them to produce more of it or less of it? Well, now they've got more money going toward Uncle Sam and less money toward going production of soda. And so we see we're going to have a decrease in supply. And so we have our S2 right there. And so we actually see this is the same shift that we had above. But at this new equilibrium, at our new equilibrium of E2, we want to understand what's happened to our price and then what has happened to our quantity. Well, whenever it's a single shift, it's pretty easy. We can look at P1 to P2 and we can say, hey, there was an increase in price. Whenever that shift of our supply curve happened, we can see that it caused our equilibrium price to rise. Well, what about from E1 to E2 when it comes to the quantity? Well, again, we can pretty easily see here there was a decrease. It caused our quantity to go down. And so again, that's exactly how you would set that one up. That's how you would draw it and label it and everything like that. But let's look down at this new graph below. What happens if there's two things that occur? And these two things are that there's an increase in the price of high fructose corn syrup, which is an input in production. At the same time, the price of Gatorade increases. And we would say that Gatorade and soda to one another, we would say that those things are substitutes. So looking at this, how would we draw this? How would we draw this on our graph? Well, let's go and take a look at these one at a time. First and foremost, if there is an increase in the price of high fructose corn syrup, which is an input, if we have more money going toward that input, that's going to cause a decrease in our supply. It's going to cause a shift back and to the left of our supply curve. And so what we notice here is we have a shift back to the left. We're going to call that S2. And then we say the price of Gatorade increases. So Gatorade's a substitute, but we have to think how this is going to play out. If Gatorade goes up in price, are people going to buy more Gatorade or less Gatorade? Well, they're going to buy less Gatorade. And if they're buying less Gatorade, that means they're going to end up buying more soda. And so what we would see here, I'm actually going to get my arrow out of the way. What we're going to see here is we would have an increase in demand. So we would have a shift to the right of demand. And so that is going to be D2 right there. So we have an increase in demand at the same time that we had a decrease in supply. And so we got both those shifts out of the way. We have now our new equilibrium. And at E2, we want to ask what has happened to our equilibrium price and quantity. Well, again, we can say beyond a shadow of a doubt here that our equilibrium price has increased. Like we can certainly see that. And it has to do with the fact that, if that demand curve had shifted on its own, like if we had just shifted here at first, it would cause an increase and then a further increase up to here. So we know for sure that an increase plus an increase is an increase. But what about quantity? Because if at first with that demand, we saw an increase in quantity and then a decrease in supply caused a decrease in quantity, and an increase plus a decrease is we don't know. So we have to say this one is unknown because we can't say for certain what has happened to our quantity here. So that's how you would work through those. Take some time to take a look at the backside, work through the backside on your own. And the answer key is available for those as well. And then just reach out if there's any that you have a specific question about on the backside.